Something that I really enjoy is giving a second life to someone's old, forgotten, overlooked household items. These are just a few of the Trash to Treasure thrift store finds I'll be upcycling today. I just absolutely love making art out of the unlikeliest of canvases. Let's get started.
I found this little table in the wood pile at the landfill. It's in kind of rough shape, but I know I can save it. It's just one of those cheap little tables and it all comes apart. And I'm gonna do some of my one-step paint and some gift wrap paper decoupage on it.
All the legs and the spindles unscrew, so it actually makes it easier for painting. I can take it all apart and then lay it all out and paint it properly. I took my 220 sanding block and I sanded it all down to get it all nice and smooth. And then I had some holes all around the outside of it. I think it had a ledge on it at one point. Filled it up with some wood filler, let it dry, and then I sanded that down and then took a baby wipe and wiped everything down clean so we have a nice surface to start on. This is the gift wrap paper that I'm going to use. I picked it up at the dollar store and I had this paint in my stash. I'm going to turn it into one-step paint, but look how it matches that gift wrap. It's going to come together perfectly. I've mixed up my one-step paint. It basically eliminates any prep to your surface or any top coat. It's all in one. It works fantastic, and wow, is it ever durable. If you want to paint a piece of furniture or cabinet doors, this is a recipe to use because it is really hard to distress afterwards. It's so hard. So if you're just going to do a solid color, this works perfect. Now I'm going to get painting these spindles. I have a little trick for painting spindles. Basically, you're just putting on a rubber glove and then one of those spare socks that you've had laying around for forever, bring them out into your crafting area and use them to paint spindles. Dip your hand in the paint with the sock and just rub it on the spindles. And I'm also going to use that same process on those two shelves. I love this red. It is so fun and so whimsical. And it's always nice every once in a while to kind of venture out of that white and black and do something with a splash of color. Now we're going to get the gift wrap and we're going to cut a piece of it off the roll a little bit bigger than the top. We're going to Mod Podge it on with my matte finish. And you're just going to brush it on. You don't want it too thick. If you have it thick, it's going to wrinkle up too much and bubble too much. You just want a thin coat, just enough to stick that wrapping paper onto the surface. Now I have added 2 coats of Mod Podge on top of that piece of wood. Let both of those coats dry completely. Now I'm going to take that gift wrap and place it exactly where I want on that piece of wood. And I'm putting a piece of parchment paper on top. Make sure it's parchment paper, not wax paper. Then we're gonna iron it on. I have my iron set on the highest setting with no steam. And you're just gonna take your time and just slowly just iron on that gift wrap. That ironed on really well. Now I'm gonna take my sanding block. This is a 80 grit sanding block and I'm just going to take it around the edges and just sand it. And as you do that, you're going to leave a really nice clean edge around your piece of wood. Now I'm going to take that sanding block across the top of that gift wrap paper. I just want to age it, kind of distress it so it doesn't look perfect. And as you can see, it did kind of wrinkle up quite a bit. I don't know if it was a different type of gift wrap paper, but I actually really like it. And as I'm sanding it, I'm liking it even more. It gives it a really distressed look. By sanding it, it knocks off that top edge of the wrinkles and leaves this beautiful distressed finish. I'm embracing the wrinkles on this one because I love the way that it turned out. I'm going to seal this up with engine enamel. This table will probably be used for a plant stand or a little end table, and I want it to be sealed really well and really be durable. This engine enamel is perfect for that. We are ready to put this dump fine table back together. And I'm going to put a couple coats of paint on the bottoms of those shelves. Someone else's trash is my treasure. I knew with a little bit of TLC and a little bit of patience, I could turn this into something beautiful again. And I love the bright color and the whimsical feel of it. And this is what I'm going to decoupage. I picked this up, I think at a yard sale. It was like 50 cents. I tucked it away because I wasn't really quite sure what I wanted to do with it, and it has so many angles on it. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to do it. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a coat of my black homemade chalk paint over the whole container. I'm going to distress this after, so that's why I like to put the black paint as the base, because when I distress it and sand it, the black will peek through and give it a little bit more of an aged look. After I've got this all painted and it's dried, I've taken a 120 grit sandpaper and I'm sanding around all of the edges. Okay, I have the dish all prepped and it's really intricate, so I thought I would do a tutorial to show you how you can decoupage on something that has lots of angles and little bits on it. So this might not be a beginner project, but it's lots of fun to watch. And this is what you're going to need to decoupage. You're going to need some, I like to use my matte Mod Podge, a little bit of saran wrap, napkin that you love, and a little paintbrush. You want to make sure that you're only working with one ply of the napkin. So we're just going to take off the top sheet. I don't get rid of these. I like to make my own custom napkins, and I also use them for cleanup. I'm going to start working on the lid first. So I want to cut a napkin just a little bit bigger than the lid size, and I want to make sure that I have the flower centered in the middle. So I'm just going to cut it out. And then we're ready to decoupage. That looks good. Okay, we're just going to put just a light amount right to the very edges. The mistake that a lot of beginner decoupagers do is putting on too much Mod Podge. If you put too much on, it's going to wrinkle and bubble for you really easy. So just put a light coat on right to the very edge. And then you're going to pick up your napkin. You can't move the napkin after you've put it on. Put it exactly where you want it. Lightly press it down. I like using my saran wrap. And then just press it down to get all the wrinkles and bubbles out. And then I'm just going to take my scissors and just kind of cut off some of that. I have a lot of extra there I don't need on. That's hanging off. And then once this is dry, then we will sand off all this extra around the edges and it'll look nice and neat and tidy. I'm going to set the lid aside and let it dry, and I'm going to start working on these panels. Same thing, we're going to cut out a piece of napkin, the size that we need, and then just Mod Podge it on. These don't have to be perfectly cut out. You just want a smaller size so it's easier to work with. Here's a little trick if you have something that is kind of moving around on you. I love these little lint rollers. I use this with my Cricut. Stick it on your table and then stick your project on, and it's not going to move on you. Paint on your Mod Podge right to the edge. Now I don't want my Mod Podge to hang over the edge of this, so I'm just putting it right to the edge because I'm going to do it in panels. I'm going to press it down exactly where I want it. Get my saran wrap, press it down. That looks perfect. Now, before I do this one, I want to let this one dry. So I'm going to go on to this one here, and then I'm just going to work my way around. I've set this aside and I've let it dry. It's all dry completely. Now before I sand off all these little edges, I like to put a top coat on. I don't like using Mod Podge as a top coat. I find that it
does introduce some bubbles and wrinkles a little bit easier than if I just use my polyacrylic sealer. So that's what I'm going to use as a top coat. This one's a satin base. You can use whatever base you want. Make sure you're using a water-based polyacrylic sealer, or your projects will yellow on you if you use an oil-based. I find if you try to sand these edges off before you put a top coat on, you can tear at the napkin. So by putting the top coat on and then sanding, you can have a cleaner edge. And I'm just going to put the polyacrylic on the top of this. I'm doing this kind of in sections because I also want to put the napkins on these, but I want to finish these panels first before I do the next one, or it's going to be too difficult to finish up. So less is more when you're putting on a top coat. If you put on too much, it's going to bubble and wrinkle on you. So I just like to put a light coat right to the edge, set it aside, let it dry, and then we're going to sand off the extra around the edge. Now it's completely dry, and I'm taking my 120 grit sandpaper and I'm sanding off all of those extra edges and making it nice and neat and clean. I've got it all done. And I think I want to decoupage. I'm going to leave this white, but I think I want to decoupage these. So that's what I'm going to work on next. I have this all sanded and ready for the panels to be done. So let's get to work. For these smaller pieces, I want to make sure I cut out a piece of the flower to have on it. So I'm just going to go piece by piece. This is kind of tedious, but it's going to look beautiful when it's done. So we're just going to get the Mod Podge again. Just put a little bit on that little panel. Press on your napkin exactly where you want it. Smooth out any wrinkles or bubbles. You can use a saran wrap if you want to help it along. And then I'm going to do the same as what I did on the base. I'm going to go every other, let these dry, and then add the next ones in. So I'm just going to work away at that. Now I'm going to add these panels on. Same process. Got them all done, and I'm going to set them aside, let them dry again, put the top coat on. All completely dry on those other panels, so now I'm going to put the coat of polyacrylic sealer on those and then set it aside and let it dry. A few steps, but it's going to be worth it in the end, and it's going to be beautiful. So every other one that I did this time, putting a coat of the polyacrylic sealer, just a light coat. Remember, less is more when you're putting on a top coat because you don't want to introduce any bubbles and wrinkles. And then we're going to set it aside and let it dry again. That one's done. I'll put the top coat on these ones. Okay, let's them dry. Nice and neat, and I've got these edges all finished. Now I'm ready to do these ones. All dry, let's do the last bit of sanding. One little tip when you're sanding is sand away from the project, and that way you won't be pulling up the napkin in case there's a little bit that didn't adhere very well. And I try to just to pull it that way, and it'll prevent that. And see how I'm going this way on this one, and it just pulls that napkin right away and leaves a really nice finished edge. You have to be a little bit patient.
but I'll show you. See how nice of an edge that gives? I'm just going in now and just touching up the inside a little bit with the black chalk paint. When I was doing all that sanding, it kind of pooled a little bit along the edges, so I just wanted to clean it up a little bit and put another coat on, and it just makes it look a little bit nicer and a little bit more finished. And I'm going to do the same with the lid too. Put another coat all along the top. I'm not going to worry about the edges because I want to keep them kind of that distressed look, but I just want to neaten up the paint in the middle. And now you can see why I wanted to paint the black on the first layer, because when you sand, it peeks through that black and it kind of gives it that antique kind of old look, which I love. I know it's not for everybody, but I really love the rustic look, and by doing that base coat black, it just gives it that extra little touch. Now I have this all finished, but I have something that I like to do with projects that I use all the time. This is going to be mine. I'm going to keep my rings and earrings in it, and I want to seal it really well. So what I like to use is this premium automotive acrylic enamel. It seals it up rock hard, so you can wipe it, you can dust it. Almost makes it waterproof. So I'm going to take this outside and I'm going to spray it with this acrylic enamel. I am going to finish it off with this little knob I had in my stash, and I think it matches beautiful. I'm using some E6000 to glue it on the top. We're gonna let it dry, and I'll show you the finished project. Okay, lots of ideas for this shelf. So gonna take it apart. I'm going to turn it into 3 different projects. I have everything all taken apart, but when I took it apart, I didn't really pay attention, and this end is different than this end, and I want them the same. So I've just put the board over top, traced where I need to cut it so I can have both ends the same. I'm going to take those out to my shed and get those cut, and this I'm going to use as a little shelf. And I want to cut the legs on a little bit of an angle, so when you put them against the wall, it'll lay flat. So I've traced out the line that I'm going to cut there. I'm going to use my jigsaw to do all that. I'm heading out to my shed, and I'll be back in a minute. This is one end off of the shelf, and I cut it so now both the ends are the same, so it'll look nice and uniform. And I'm going to do a transfer with my polyacrylic sealer. I've done lots of these on my channel. If you haven't seen this done before, it's very similar to the Mod Podge, except you're using polyacrylic sealer. And I like using it if you don't want to paint your wood. If you want to keep your wood just the raw wood color, then this works well because it dries a lot clearer than Mod Podge. When you're doing the Mod Podge transfer, it has almost like a cloudy texture to it after you finish doing the transfer, where this one doesn't. So I am going to make a sign for a bathroom. I'm using a matte finish with the polyacrylic, and you're just going to paint it all over your graphic, and then we're going to center it on the sign, and we're going to let it dry. Now this method dries a little bit faster than the Mod Podge, so this can be ready to finish up in a couple hours, where the Mod Podge you have to leave overnight, I find, to get the best results. So we're going to just flip this over, make sure it's nice and centered where we want it, and then get all the bubbles and wrinkles out of it, and we're going to let it set aside and dry completely. This is sat overnight. We're going to take a damp cloth and just wet the paper until you can start to see the graphics show through, and then rub it off. I got all the paper rubbed off. This is a little bit trickier to do on raw wood with the polyacrylic, but it does work. As you can see, it's not perfect. You get a really rustic transfer, but that's what I kind of wanted for this sign, so it worked out perfect. And now I'm going to seal it with some polyacrylic sealer. A beautiful natural wood sign, just made with polyacrylic sealer. Takes a little bit of patience, but it works fantastic. I took this outside and with my jigsaw, just cut it on a little bit of an angle so when we prop it up against the wall, it'll sit nice. And I'm gonna put a light coat of my homemade stain on this just to darken it up just a little bit. I have a full tutorial on how to make this stain and use it. It's really simple, really easy, just some acrylic paint and water. And it's just gonna kind of darken it up and give it a nice color. So I'm just gonna go around with the rag and just rub this on. I wasn't sure how this was going to work out, but it worked out perfect. And what a cute little spot to keep little knickknacks. I love it. You can keep it in the kitchen and put tea towels on it or little spice jars. Great ideas. So the other end of the shelf, I think what I'm gonna do with this is I'm gonna turn it into a big farmhouse sign. I had this chunk of wood and it's really kind of rustic looking. I'm gonna screw this board into the top of it, make it all one piece and turn it into a real old vintage sign. I've got it all nailed together with a little bit of wood glue, but there's a little bit of a crack right here. So I'm gonna take my wood filler. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm just gonna take some wood filler and just kind of fill it in a little bit, just so it looks like it's all one piece. My wood filler is all dry and I am ready to get painting. I'm gonna give this a real chippy, fantastic farmhouse look. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to add some candle wax and then I'm going to add some black chalk paint. My black chalk paint's all dry. I haven't done any crackle paint in a while. That's what I'm gonna do today. And if you haven't seen me do it before, it is so easy. All you need is school glue and you just put it on your project. As much as you put on will determine how thick or thin your cracks are. I'm gonna do probably a pretty thick coat so I can have some pretty big crackles in this. And you just spread it out over your whole project. You can use any kind of school glue. Just the cheap stuff works too. You don't have to use the Elmer's. And just spread it all over everywhere that you want your paint to crackle on top. Just spreading it around really good. And the places where you have it thicker or thinner, then you'll have thicker or thinner crackles. We're gonna let this sit just to tack up just a little bit for about 2 or 3 minutes. It's been 2 minutes. I'm gonna take my white chalk paint. Now the trick with this technique is just do long strokes. You don't want to go over that paint any more than once or twice, and don't pull your brush back because that will wreck the crackling effect. So you just kind of slop it on because we're trying to achieve like an old rustic vintage looking piece of wood. So they're never perfect looking. And you can go up and back, but don't do any more. Just leave it as that. You can go up and back, and you can go up and back and leave it. Slop it on, and you can do more colors underneath too. You just can kind of play around and see what you like. Okay, I'm gonna leave that. We're gonna let it crackle and you'll see the fantastic result when it's all dry. This is all dry and look at the cracking and the aged look that this has. I'm gonna take it outside and I'm gonna give it a really good sanding to finish it off. We are ready to turn this into a sign. I am going to do my Mod Podge reverse graphic. I have printed off, I'm using a graphic that I made, Vintage Market Antiques Junk Buy Sell Trade. You can, as you can see, I've printed these off on 3 different sheets. Just keep sizing it up until you get the size of your board within your Word program, and you can make bigger signs.
I'm just going to cut these out and size them up on my board and get them where I want to before I get the Mod Podge going. Okay, after I printed the graphics off, I wasn't really happy with the size that they were and how they looked. So I fooled around with them a little bit, resized them, and I really like the way this is now. And this took a little bit of time, a little bit of measuring. You keep making them bigger in your Word program or smaller to fit the area that you want, and it works perfect. So we're going to use our Mod Podge mat and get this put on the sign. Okay, it's the next day and I'm going to finish this sign up. Now, one tip, if you are making signs on top of this crackle paint, you have to make sure that you don't put too much water on. If you put too much water on your sign, it will reactivate the glue and it'll rub off really easy. So you have to just be really conscious of that. Just put just enough water on, just so you can just start to see the letters show through, and do small sections. Don't do the whole sign and make it all wet. Just do one section at a time and just take your time. I have it all rubbed off, and it's a little bit of a job. I did this through fast speed, so you didn't have to watch me do it, but it actually took me probably about a half an hour to finish this and rub off all the paper. So it is a bit of a job, and you can see here I've done a lot of these signs, and even still I rubbed some of that off. I don't mind it with this type of a sign because it's very rustic, very vintage looking, and I'm really happy with the way that it turned out. I'm going to seal it up with some polyacrylic sealer, and we're finished. So just taking the top off of that shelf, I was able to create this with another piece of scrap wood that I had. So easy, and I love it. I'm just going to put some E6000 around the rim of the candlestick. This is the clear. And then I'm going to take a little bit from my hot glue gun so I can keep it in place so it doesn't move around. Just put a little tiny bit here and there so it sticks. And this is a really easy way to create a tiered bowl. And it just takes a plain, ordinary crystal bowl and kind of just kicks it up a notch. I'm just going to set that aside and let it dry. I love this little crystal bowl and candlesticks. It was so easy to make. So when you're at the thrift store, make sure you look out for those crystal bowls. This one's going to be really simple too. This was a candle that I bought, I think at Winners or HomeSense. I used it up. I've washed it all out. And then I painted it with my homemade chalk paint. I put a Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer on the front of it, sealed it up with some polyacrylic sealer, and I just thought it was just plain. It needed something more. So I thought, again, I'll use one of the candlesticks from the dollar store and turn it into more of a pillar, and then you can put another candle in it and it'll look really pretty. Same thing, I'm going to put the E6000 around the rim and then a little bit of the hot glue to hold it in place. And that's it for that one. A little bit of hot glue. Make sure it's centered right in the middle of your project. That's not going anywhere. Gonna set it aside and let it dry. Pray big, worry small. And this was just made from a candlestick from the dollar store and a candle that I had used up, painted with some of my homemade chalk paint, and put a graphic on it. Okay, the bird tray. I think I'm gonna turn it into a serving tray. I don't want to cover this up because I think it's just kind of neat and it's original and it's very retro looking. So I'm going to clean it all up. I think I'm going to paint the outside of it, add some handles, and make it into a serving tray for this summer.
all taped off. I'm gonna just give it a really light skiff of a sand. This is really fine. This is like 240, and then I'll be ready to put the chalk paint on. I've got some beautiful pink chalk paint that I made quite a while ago. It's not the perfect match, but I think it's gonna go with that real retro feel of the birds. Yeah, and I'm loving it like that. I think that's gonna be a really nice match. First coat's all dry. The second coat I'm gonna sponge on. I find it gives it a nicer, smooth finish than just brushing it on. And that looks much better. I am loving the pink. It's way better than that dark green color. Okay, this is almost dry. Not quite dry. I'm gonna pull the tape off while it's still a little bit damp. I ended up putting on 2 coats of the sponged chalk paint, and it just gives it a really nice kind of textured look that I like. So let's hope when I take this tape off that it's a nice clean edge. Not too bad. I had a little bit of an area right here where the tape it was really hard because the line wasn't right butted up against the edge. I'm just gonna take a small little paintbrush and clean it all up. Everything's completely dry. I want to seal this really well, especially if I'm going to be using it out on the patio in the summer. So I'm going to use my engine enamel spray, and this is really tough and it gets a really good coat. So I'm going to take this outside and I'm going to give it a really good spray over the whole thing. I found these handles in my stash and I think they are so fitting for this tray. They're very kind of 50s vibes, and they have a really nice flat surface here that I think I can just use my E6000 and glue them on, and I think it'll stick really well. If it doesn't, I have some little screws that I can drill up in behind after and do that, but I'm gonna try this first and I think they're gonna look fantastic. I'm not even gonna change the color of them or anything. And what a fun upcycle. The pink made the birds pop in the print. I'm really glad that I didn't paint over those birds. The little handles are perfect for this type of style, and the E6000 bonded really well. They're on there nice and tight. I'm happy with it, and it's ready to go out on my deck this summer. Now my fantastic light fixture piece. I'm gonna clean it up really well. It's kind of dusty and dirty, but the top off of that box that I took apart, I'm gonna use this as a base for this, and we're gonna turn it into a beautiful lighted vase. I had so many of you that recommended doing this, and I never even thought of it. So that's what I'm gonna create. I'm gonna put a coat of my homemade black chalk paint over this, and I think that'll look really nice with the glass fixture. I got 1 coat of the black chalk paint on the base of this pedestal for the lamp, and I cleaned it really good, and as I was scrubbing it, it brought out a little bit of gold. So I want to highlight that in the base also. I've got a little bit of gold acrylic paint, and I'm just going to kind of almost maybe just dry brush it on, just so it will give it a nice kind of blended in look for the lamp. Yeah, I like that. Just that little touch of gold. Not a lot, but just to help it complement that lamp. Okay, this is all dry with a little touch of the gold, and I have a battery operated little light. I'm going to put that in the center, and then I'm going to place the lamp over top of it. It'll light up the base, and it looks beautiful. I'll show you how it came together. I filled the top with some faux ivy and some twigs that I had, placed it on the base, and put the little puck light inside of it. And do you ever have those projects that now I'm mad I have never done anything with this? I've had this for so long and it is so beautiful. I just love the way that it glows with that puck light on. It's fantastic. Okay, this is an absolute piece of junk. Doesn't work. It was falling apart, but I saw the potential in it. It was in the scrap metal bin. I took off that plastic piece and the rusty colors underneath was fabulous. I'm going to scrape off all of the loose rust, clean it up a little bit, and then I'm going to seal it up with some engine enamel. As soon as I started spraying on this engine enamel, the colors even popped even more. I am so glad I rescued this from the dump. I just put some masking tape on the numbers so I wouldn't get that damaged. And I just set it up as a little place to keep a vignette, a little sign and a book, a sprig of faux flowers, and it would look beautiful displayed on an old cabinet. And just being an old scale, fantastic. This was one of my favorite dump finds for my outdoor patio. An old footstool, and it was in really rough shape, really needed some TLC. I took off all of the steps and they needed to be cleaned really well, and the metal needed to be painted. So I'm gonna first work on these steps, cleaned off all the junk and stuff that was in it. And when I flipped it over, it had a beautiful red color, and I have that red paint. If you remember back that table that I finished, I have some of that red paint left over. I'm going to use that on these steps. For the metal frame, I picked out this beautiful turquoise color. Once everything was dry, I put it all together, and I love the red and the turquoise color together, and it looked beautiful in my garden with just that pop of color. I put some plants on the steps, and an amazing find at the dump, upcycled beautifully. Another rusty loaf pan. This one's gonna turn into a little basket. I had this little handle, not even sure where it came from. It was in my stash, and some rusty wire. I'm going to drill a hole in each end of that loaf pan, and then we're going to string that wire through that little handle and attach it onto the loaf pan. If you have any little metal bits when you're drilling through this, just take a little bit of sandpaper and that will sand it down, and then you won't catch your fingers on it if it's rough. Then I'm going to seal everything up with my matte polyacrylic sealer and then attach it all. And I've taken that rusty loaf pan and turned it into a really cute little basket. So don't overlook all those rusty bits and pieces that you have or you see out and about. Just get some creativity going and you can create some beautiful home decor. Another rusty loaf pan. This one's going to turn into a little basket. I had this little handle, not even sure where it came from. It was in my stash, and some rusty wire. I'm going to drill a hole in each end of that loaf pan, and then we're going to string that wire through that little handle and attach it onto the loaf pan. If you have any little metal bits when you're drilling through this, just take a little bit of sandpaper and that will sand it down, and then you won't catch your fingers on it if it's rough. Then I'm going to seal everything up with my matte polyacrylic sealer and then attach it all. And I've taken that rusty loaf pan and turned it into a really cute little basket. So don't overlook all those rusty bits and pieces that you have or you see out and about. Just get some creativity going and you can create some beautiful home decor. Next upcycle is this chair that I actually found on the side of the road. Brought it home because I knew I could make it pretty again. The seat was in really rough shape, so I'm taking off the chair pad and I'm going to replace it with something new. It was easy to remove, it was just staples, and I just popped them off. For the year 2022, this yellow color was my go-to color. I did so many DIYs with this and I still love it. I just find that it's so warm and so inviting. I'm going to paint this chair frame with this yellow and then distress it a little bit so it looks old and rustic. Now to tackle the chair top. I found this foam chair pad at the thrift store. The rug was at the dollar store. I cut it to size so it would fit the chair, and I got some fabric glue because when I cut the rug, it started to unravel a little bit. Put on the fabric glue and then used my staple gun to staple it all together. This little dollar store rug made a perfect cushion for my chair. And it had that yellow in the fabric, which I think tied it all together. Beautiful upcycled roadside find. This was absolutely one of my favorites. I think it was the back of a chair. It looked like it had broken off, but I wanted to sand it down, bring some of that wood up from underneath, give it that distressed look. And then the inside of the chair, I'm gonna cut a piece of MDF to fit on the back and then do a beautiful quote on it. I painted the MDF with some black chalk paint and then some white chalk paint, sanded it all down. It's now ready to put on my graphics. I love this quote. It's a mindset quote. It's available in my Etsy store. Probably one of my favorite graphics. Gonna use my Mod Podge mat, and I made sure that I measured it all out so it would fit evenly down that piece of wood, and then we're going to put it onto the back of the chair. Once I had all the paper rubbed off, I sealed it up with some polyacrylic sealer. This sign I ended up selling, and it was one of those regrets after I did it because I know I'll never find another chair back like this again. That happens to me all the time. I wish I hang on to something and then I sell it, and then I have these feelings of, oh, I shouldn't have because I loved it so much. This was one of these projects. Now this next sign, I had so many people say it looks like an owl, and I did this around fall time, and I should have maybe turned it into a Halloween theme sign with the owl outline, but I didn't see it when I was doing it. Now I can't unsee it. But I painted this with some black chalk paint, used all kinds of candle wax to give a distressed finish, and then I got out this beautiful turquoise color and painted it, put another lot of candle wax on there, layered up that yellow that I love, and that's going to finish off the frame for this picture. I cut a piece of MDF to fit the back, layered up the paint again, just like I did on the front. I even used a toothbrush to kind of speckle on some of that turquoise, just giving it that vintage feel. And then I'm going to dry brush a little bit of white on. When you're doing the graphic transfer, I find that it shows the best if you have a little bit of white paint, and it just helps it pop more. I love this tea graphic that I designed. I thought it was perfect for this frame before I actually thought that it looked like an owl. But when it was all finished, I absolutely loved it. I'm going to seal everything up with my polyacrylic sealer and then attach it to the back of the frame with a little bit of hot glue. Now that it's all finished, and I love it, but I definitely see an owl now, and I probably should have done a Halloween theme in an orange with a Halloween graphic in the middle. This project I turned into a reel, and it was one of my most popular reels on Instagram and TikTok. Everyone loved it. I took an old dresser drawer and turned it into a birdhouse. It was made completely with bits and pieces and scrap, and when it was all done and pulled all together, it was the cutest thing ever. At the thrift store, and it fit absolutely perfect right in that drawer. Painted it with some chalk paint, distressed it, and then I printed off my home tweet home graphic to put in the middle of that plaque. We're going to let it sit for 24 hours and then take some water, rub off the paper, and then seal it up, and it's going to fit perfect in my little project. I had a bit of rusty chain with a little clamp at the bottom that would hook into the dresser drawer pull, a half of a spindle that I'm going to use as a perch that I screwed on, and isn't this so cute? All from just scrap bits and pieces. I love when I find old shovels. People always throw them in the dump after the wooden handle has busted off them. I don't care if I have the wooden handle on them because you can upcycle them and turn them into beautiful signs for your garden. I painted this one with my white homemade chalk paint, printed off this graphic, and we're going to Mod Podge it onto the shovel. Now because the shovel is beveled a little bit, I cut this graphic in half so it would lay nicer and centered it where I wanted it, let it sit for 24 hours, dampened the paper, rubbed off the paper, and we're left with beautiful graphics on this old discarded shovel. Thanks for watching my video on the most incredible dump find upcycles of 2022. I hope you enjoyed seeing all these creative and resourceful ways to turn trash into treasure. This cute little chair. It didn't need very much. It already had that chippy look that I love. I just decided to maybe give it a little bit more. I have some 80 grit sandpaper and I'm just kind of sanding on the areas where it was chipping a little bit and bringing up some of that paint color from underneath. Now the bottom of the chair had never been painted, so I painted it with some of my black homemade chalk paint, and then I cleaned it all down, and that's all that this dump find needed. I sealed it up with some polyacrylic sealer and it looked beautiful in my garden. I used it as a little plant stand, added one of my signs to it. Pretty good for a free dump find. Another dump find was this window. One of the panes of glass was broken, but that's okay. I can work with it. Scrubbed it all down with some TSP so it's nice and clean. And then I scraped off any loose paint and then I was going to seal it up with my polyacrylic sealer. Now for this project, I'm going to be using my Mirror Effect spray paint. If you have not used this product before, you need to give it a try. It will give glass a vintage mirror look. Now I want to do a little bit of an extra step. So I got out some of my stencils, placed the stencil in the middle of the glass, and I used my chalk paint and I stenciled on the mandala. Let it completely dry, and then I got out my Mirror Effect spray paint. Now this takes a mixture of water and vinegar and the Mirror Effect spray paint. On the back side of the glass that we stenciled on that mandala, you're going to spray on the Mirror Effect spray paint. Before it dries, you're going to squirt on that water vinegar mixture and then take a paper towel and blot at it. And as you're doing that, it's creating a faux antique mirror look. You're going to keep applying those two steps until you get the desired look that you want, and it is absolutely beautiful. So now you can get the mirror effect. You want to paint the back of that now with some dark color. I like using black, and then when you flip it over, you're going to see how beautiful this is with the stencil on it and the mirror effect behind it. Absolutely love this dump upcycle. So glad I found this window. I also found one table leg, clawfoot with the glass ball in it. Absolutely gorgeous. Brought it home because I had a vision, and I'm going to turn it into a bit of a hanger for one of my wooden signs. I have this piece of pine, scrap pine, and I'm going to give it an aged chippy vintage look using my candle wax technique, painting it with some black chalk paint. Going to layer up a bunch of different colors and then add my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfers. This is probably one of my favorite signs of the year that I've made. And I also decided to do the hairspray crackle technique on this. It can be a bit tricky, but if you can get it to work for you, it's fantastic, and it gives a real authentic chippy look. So the trick with the hairspray crackle technique is to use acrylic paint. You can't use latex paint. Spraying the hairspray in between each coat, letting it dry, and you can use your heat gun to dry it in between too, and that will also give a little bit more of an authentic crackle. Putting on my white acrylic paint on top, we're going to now dry it, and you'll see as I'm drying this with my heat gun, the crackles will appear. Absolutely fantastic technique for making authentic old looking signs. Gonna scrape away at it, take a little bit of water on a stencil brush to age it even more. And I know this seems like a lot of work, but if you're taking the time to make really gorgeous signs, it's worthwhile having a beautiful base before you start. This graphic's available in my Etsy store. I love this organic theme graphic, and using my Mod Podge mat.
let it sit for 24 hours, and then I'm taking a little bit of water, rubbing off that paper, and once I have this sign all done, I'm going to seal it up with some polyacrylic sealer and add that table leg to the top to hang the sign from with some old rusty chain. I love this. This next dump find was one of those start the car. I found this in the wood pile at the dump. I could not believe somebody had just disregarded it. It looked like it maybe had been on a porch in the sun. It was really dry and brittle, but I knew I could give it a new life. Sanded it down with some sandpaper just to knock off any varnish that was left on it. Gave it a really good cleaning and then let it dry completely. Now for the wood parts on the rocking chair, it was so dry. I went to my local Home Depot and they recommended this product. It's a penetrating oil and it just soaked right up into the wood. I actually ended up putting on 2 coats of it, and I'll probably do it again next season because it really needed the moisture. And for the caning, I was recommended some linseed oil. I put a couple really good liberal coats on it. When this was finished, oh my gosh, you guys, it is gorgeous. It is at our cabin. I have it up in our bedroom right now at the cabin, but it's going to go on my porch in the summer. Unbelievable find. Now this little lantern was in the scrap metal bin. Gorgeous lantern, but the glass piece was missing. And I didn't want to paint this. I wanted to really keep that rust feel. So I took it outside and I gave it a really good coat with some of my engine enamel. This makes it really durable, and it also is great if you want to keep it outside. It will stand up in the weather really well. So I gave it 2 really good coats of this engine enamel, and it just made the rust gorgeous looking. Love the color of it. Once it was dry, I knew it needed something to put in the middle. So I got a tin can, painted it with some white chalk paint, and then I used one of my homemade napkins to decoupage on the front of the tin can, filled it up with some greenery, and I thought it just finished off this lantern that I found in the scrap metal bin perfect. This next dump find DIY was a huge project. I found this cabinet in the wood pile. Nothing had been done to it other than the original build of the cabinet. It was raw pine, and I wanted to give it a real farmhouse feel. So first job was painting everything with some black homemade chalk paint, and I want to give it a really chippy distressed finish. You know that I love that look. So I used my Vaseline, and I'm gonna layer up a couple different colors. Now I know it looks like a splotchy mess right now. Hang tight because the end result is really beautiful. I'm gonna use my hairspray technique again, spraying on that hairspray and then painting some acrylic white paint on top of it, using my heat gun to dry as I go along. Because it's such a big piece, I'm doing it in sections and then drying it and then painting another section. And you can see the crackling start, and I just love that farmhouse feel that I'm getting with this technique. I'm going to scrape all around the edges because remember way back in the beginning I put on the Vaseline, and I want to expose that paint from underneath all those different colors. So just going to scrape away, and it's just really adding to that chippy feel. Using a little bit of water and my stencil brush, this allows you to remove paint down to the next layer or the layer even below, and it just gives that authentic worn look. Now let's talk about these graphics. It was a big door and I wanted the graphics to go from the top to the bottom. So I used 2 of my graphics, printed them off on my LaserJet printer, making sure to reverse them. They're all available in my Etsy store, and I sized them so they would fit that whole panel of the door. I let them sit for 24 hours, rubbed off the paper, and was left with a fantastic graphic along that whole panel. What do you think? Found this cabinet door in the wood pile, still had the original hinges and the knob. Absolutely love the chippy look of it already. Not going to do much to it other than just scrape off the little bits and pieces of loose paint. this farmhouse graphic that's going to be perfect for this project, and I'm going to do my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method with my matte Mod Podge. Now to finish this DIY off, I found these hooks in the scrap metal bin. Also, chippy paint is fabulous. Gonna screw them onto the bottom. And this is what I created from an old discarded cabinet door.
I think I picked these up at Winners, and I think this came from the thrift store. Yeah, for $1.49, and then it was 25% off with the yellow tag. And I'm gonna turn it into a really kind of pedestal looking plant holder. I'm going to take the middle candle holder out of that. We don't need that. I'm going to scrape the bottom pieces off that are the little rubber pieces that we don't need anymore. Put some E6000 on the candle holder. And I like the contrast of the black and this plaster white. I think it's going to look really nice. A little bit of hot glue just to bond it in place so it doesn't move around. Now this one I can't turn upside down, so I'm just going to try to center it the best I can so it doesn't move around. Oh, I should take the sticker off the bottom and make sure it's centered really well, and then set it aside and let it dry. I didn't have to do anything to this. I left the candlestick as I bought it, and the flower pot I just left. So easy to put together, and it looks so much better. Now to work on the clock. I'm taking the screws out of the back, and this just lifted right out, so I have my clock face. I'm gonna work on my frame first. Okay, I got one full coat on. I'm gonna let it dry completely, and then I've got this beautiful blue color by Behr, Bermuda Blue it's called, and I'm gonna paint the outside of the frame with this color. First coat of the blue is on. Now I would have taken the glass out, but it's really stapled in there really well, and I didn't want to break the glass. I'll just have to clean it really well after I'm finished painting, so it looks nice. This is almost dry, and I should have mentioned before, the reason that I put the coat of white chalk paint on first is because when you're using chalk paint, you don't have to prep the surface, and it'll adhere much better to, look, I'm a mess, to adhere to a surface. So this blue color is just a latex paint, so I wanted to have something that would stick really well. That's why I did the first coat of the white first. I'm going to take the handles off this clock, and there's just a little washer in there that you just loosen up, and it takes the handles right off. It's a little bit fiddly to get at, but I'm going to work away at that. I've got the clock all taken out, and now I have this piece here, and I'm going to decoupage onto this. Okay, as I'm taking this apart, I don't think this comes right off as just a little sheet of tin. I'm not going to decoupage on this because I have a nice wooden surface underneath, and I'm just going to decoupage the napkin right straight on it and then put the handles back on. I don't care about the numbers or anything because I'll just have the hands. So I'm not going to use this. I'm just going to decoupage right onto the wood. I'm going to use my Mod Podge mat, and I'm just going to put a light coat over the whole surface. I kind of like to do it in sections. I don't like to do a great big patch all at once because it's really hard to smooth it out. So I'm just going to do the top section, lay the napkin down, and then I'll pull it back and I'll do the next section. You also don't want to put too much on. When you put too much on, it introduces bubbling and wrinkling. So that should be pretty good for my first section. And I'm just going to lay the napkin right down into it, press it, and then you can lift it back and do the next section. Now I've just lifted that back and I'll do the next section. It's just easier to manage when you do it in little sections like this than trying to slop it all down in one go. And if you're finding that you're getting a few little bubbles and wrinkles, you can also use a little bit of saran wrap to push them out. That works really well. And you can just use your hand. And we're going to flip it up and go to the next section. So I'm just going to finish this. I've got it all decoupaged down. I'm just going to take my brush and just do a real light coat over the top. And then we're going to set it aside and let it dry completely. Everything's all dry. I'm just going to take a piece of 120 sandpaper and just sand around the edges. And when you do that, it'll give you a nice clean edge. I'm going to give the outside of the clock, now that it's all dried, a little bit of a distressing too. Give it kind of a rustic, nice feel. And when I'm sanding, it's going to show a little bit of the white and a little bit of the wood, and I like that. Well, I really went back and forth a lot on this clock and what to do with it, but I'm really happy that I decided to paint it and just decoupage in the middle. I just left the arms gold on the faceplate of the clock. I think it fits in perfect, and I've already got it mounted in my craft room. I think it fits in with my decor really well. Successful upcycle. You know I have way too much stuff when every time I go in my shed I find something else that I can make into something tiered. I have this little glass vase. I think it probably came from the dollar store at one point. And I had this wicker basket and I thought it would be really cute if I could make it raised. And I think what I'm going to do with this, I'm going to paint this with some of my sand paint, give it a textured look. And I think it'll look really nice with this wicker basket. If I'm going to paint this with my sand paint, I'm going to take this out to my shed. I'm going to give it a coat of some white spray paint, and then I'm going to mix up some of my chalk paint and paint it, and I'll bring it back in and do that. This has just got a light coat of white spray paint on it, and it just makes the chalk paint, or actually the sand paint that I'm going to be using, adhere to it a lot better. And you can see the texture that it creates. So I'm just going to go ahead and get a couple coats of the sand paint on. If I have a project that I want to seal really well and then be able to kind of maybe wipe it down with a damp rag, I really like to use this engine enamel. You can find it at automotive stores, on Amazon, and it'll seal up your project and make it really durable. I'm going to take this outside to my shed and give it a really good coat of this, because this is going to be made into a planter and I want it to stand up in case it has any water or anything that might drip on it. This is all dry from the sand paint. I've put the coat of the enamel spray paint on it, and I'm going to attach my wicker basket onto it. I'm going to use my E6000, and then I'm going to put on some hot glue to make sure that it adheres really well. And I think this is going to make a fantastic plant stand. Just going to make sure that I have it centered on properly. I'm going to turn it this way. Centered right in the middle. We're going to let that dry, and it'll be all ready tomorrow to put a plant in it. This might be one of my favorites, just the wicker basket and that little vase that I painted with some sand paint, and it turned into a beautiful plant stand. Next one, tiered bowls from the dollars or from the thrift store. And I love this spindle. I have way too many spindles and I love turning these spindles into tiered trays. I'm going to take this out to my shed, measure it up what the size I want, and then cut it with my chop saw. And then we'll put this one together. Okay, I've cut this to the size that I wanted on my chop saw. And I think I like the bigger part at the top. So same process again. I'm gonna put on some E6000, some hot glue to hold it in place. And I've never had any problem with these not staying together. If you have a brad nailer, you can always brad nail this a little bit. But I don't have one and I've never had any problem with these not adhering really well. So I'm going to center that in the middle. It's going to stay put. And then I'm going to put a little bit of hot glue and then some E6000 on the top. Set the top bowl on. And then we are ready to let that one sit aside and dry really well. That's it. We're going to let it sit and dry. I actually changed my mind after I put this together before it dried. I didn't like the spindle that way, so I switched it around and I put it this way and I love it. So simple to put together. 2 wooden bowls from the thrift store, a piece of an old spindle that I painted with some really pretty acrylic paint, and you put it together. I think this would make a fantastic fruit bowl in the kitchen. Next project is this little glass vase. I fell in love with it. I have no idea what it was, and it has a hole in the bottom, hole in the top, looks like a beehive, little things in it. It's really dirty, needs a really good cleaning. Picked it up for $3.99. I'm kind of wondering if it was something to catch bugs. If any of you know what this is, let me know down in the comments, but I have a wonderful idea on how to upcycle this. Okay, I've got it all cleaned up and ready to go. And I mixed up some baking powder paint. If you haven't tried this, I did a video not that long ago on how to make it, and it creates a fluffy, fantastic paint. That's what I'm going to use, and I love this yellow color. Let's get painting. This might take 2 or 3 coats, and this paint does not have a long shelf life, so only mix up as much as you need for your project. Or it'll dry out on you. The first coat has dried, and now I'm going back and I'm just patting the paint on for the second coat, and it just kind of gives it that real kind of fluffy textured look. I think it kind of looks great. It makes this look more like a beehive. And that's the second coat on, and see how fluffy it is? I love it. My beehive is completely dry, and wow, talk about texture. I love it. And I'm gonna make a little hang tag for it. I've just got a piece of MDF board. I'm gonna paint it black, and then I'm gonna put a coat of white chalk paint on it, and then I've got a really cute honey graphic that I'm going to put on the top of it. So I'm gonna work away on that. My little tag has sat overnight. I've got my little dish of water. Just gonna wet it so you can start to see the graphics through. You wanna make sure when you're doing this technique, you don't put too much water on, so you can see how the graphics are just starting to show through. And then rub it off, and you have a graphic. So easy. My tag's all done, and I think it's adorable. I took a yellow marker and I kind of colored in the bee a little bit to give it a little extra touch, drilled a hole in the top, put some twine, and I'm going to attach it to my painted beehive. The texture that this baking powder paint made was perfect for this project, and I love that graphic. Now I'm going to do a flower pot with a candlestick. This was from the thrift store, $2.99, and I think when I got it this day, it was 75% off. So that was a great deal for that. And I picked up this at Value Village, and I think it was $1.99. So I'm going to glue those two together. E6000. This rim is a little bit thinner, so I have to be a little bit more precise to make sure I get that glue on there and not make a mess. You don't want it dripping everywhere. And then a little bit of hot glue to keep it in place. Center it on your bowl so it's right in the center. Set it aside, let it dry. I'm going to spray paint this with some white chalk paint, and then I'm going to give it a coat over the whole thing with some of my sand paint. It's going to give it a really nice texture. So I'm going to take this out to my shed and get that spray painted. I've got a coat of the white spray paint on this, and now I'm going to go over the outside and the base with some of my sand paint. A pink flower pot and a silver candlestick painted with some of my textured sand paint, and it gives it a whole new life. I think I am going to turn this into a plant holder. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clean it all up. It's pretty dusty. I'm going to take the hardware off and take off the blue piece of foam that's on the inside and just clean it up really well. Okay, I got all the hardware off. This is the lid. I'm going to save this for another project. Perfect square to reuse. And the box, I've cleaned it all up. And now I'm going to start to upcycle it. I never throw out any hardware. I have a little container. I keep this all in because you never know when you're going to need it on another upcycling project. I'm going to keep it right in my little tin can that I upcycled. And I got all my hinges and my handles and my screws in it. I can always go back into it and root through it and find what I'm needing when I'm doing something else. But I love this little graphic that I put on this tin can. Such an easy upcycle if you have some tin cans and you want to make one. Now, I could upcycle this and take it outside and sand it down right back to its natural wood color. If it was summer, I probably would, but I have to go out into my shed and sand out there. I don't want to sand in my house. It's minus 30 degrees Celsius today. Not doing it. So I'm going plan B, and I am going to paint this. So first thing I'm going to do, I just have some 120 sandpaper, and I'm just going to give it a light sanding over the whole box. I get it all just lightly sanded. I'm going to put a little bit of wood filler in the little holes here where the hardware was. I'm not going to worry about where the hinges was because this is going to be at the back of the planter, and the plant will be hanging over and you won't see this. But I've got a little bit of wood filler, and I'm just going to clean these up. Okay, we're all ready to paint. I'm going to put a little bit of candle wax on. I'm going to do the candle wax technique, and then I'm going to put a coat of my black homemade chalk paint on. First coat's all dry. I'm going to take the wax again and go all around the corners, wherever you think that it would look a little bit worn off. Add some candle wax, and then I'm going to put a coat of my white homemade chalk paint on. Everything's all completely dry because I did the candle wax method. I like to warm up the wax underneath the layers of paint with my heat gun, and then take my scraper and scrape it away. And it eliminates almost all the need to sand, but leaves you a real chippy, rustic look. So I'm going to work away at that. Okay, my box is all distressed, painted, and I'm going to put a real farmhouse graphic on this. And I'm going to be using my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method with my Mod Podge mat. Simple, easy way to transfer graphics or photos with Mod Podge. Just going to put a light coat over my graphic, center it on the box exactly where I want it, and then we're going to flip it over and we're going to let it sit for 24 hours so it gets nice and dry, and then we're going to rub the paper off. You want to make sure you take your time when you are putting it on your project, because if it's crooked, you can't fix it. My graphic is all dry. I got a little damp rag. We're going to wet the paper and then rub the graphics off. If you're new here, you might not have seen me do this transfer method before, but it is so easy and so versatile. You can do it on so many projects. If you've been around here for a long time, you know that I love using it, and I have all kinds of projects on my channel that I've already done doing this. It just takes a little bit of practice, and you can do it with an inkjet or a LaserJet printer. So I'm just going to rub all of this paper off and get ready to put some legs on. I'm going to use some spindles and put some legs on the bottom. I'm ready to put some legs on this box. I've got the graphics all done. I haven't sealed it up yet, but I had these spindles. I had 2 spindles and I cut them in half, and I've made 4 legs. So I'm just going to drill some pilot holes in the bottom of this and in the legs and then put it together. Okay, I got all the legs on. I am not a carpenter, and most of the time when I have to do stuff like this, I don't even know if I'm doing it the proper way, but I get the job done, and it usually is pretty good. So I just pre-drilled some holes and then screwed the screws through and then twisted on these spindle legs, tight as can be. We're ready to seal this all up with some polyacrylic sealer. And how perfect is that for a little spot to put a plant? Love the way it turned out. Real farmhouse vibes, and much better than that little box with the lid. The candlestick holder. I'm going to clean it up first. The paint's kind of chipping off it a little bit. Give it a good scrub, get all the loose paint off, paint it up again, and transform this into a bird feeder. Now that I've got it all scrubbed up and cleaned, I actually really like it. I kind of like the rustic feel of it. I think I'm just going to leave it. Not all the time do you have to paint something that you find. You can kind of just recreate it the way that it is. And I'm just going to leave this the red color. I really love it. I went to the dollar store and I found these little dishes. They were $1.50 for 3 of them. And I think they're going to work perfect to set on top of these and then fill with birdseed. These little dishes fit perfect right on top of those candle holders. I'm going to use some E6000 and let it sit until tomorrow after I get it all put together. I've taken my bird feeder out to the garage, and I found this little bird that I glued on the top. I thought that was really cute. But I had remembered I had this stand that I got out of the dump. I think it's an old ashtray holder, and I had my husband drill a couple holes in the bottom because it was really thick metal, and I'm going to screw it on top of this stand. And my bird feeder is all set up outside. We will just wait for the birds to come. But it is so cute and beautiful. And I'm so glad that I remembered I had this stand, because I can fill the bottom up with a little bit of bird seed. It worked perfect. And the little bird at the top finished it off. I got 2 wooden bowls I picked up at Value Village, and 2 candlesticks that I picked up at Bibles for Mission, $2.99 each. They were on the 75% off table, and I'm going to turn these into a matching set, but I don't want to, I think I want to paint these with some black spray paint to make them black, make them a little bit more farmhouse modern looking. So I'm going to take these out to my shed and spray paint them black, and when they're dry, I'll put these together. These candlesticks are all dry. I took them out, I gave them a couple coats of spray paint. And this is such an easy little DIY that just takes 2 plain wooden bowls and 2 crystal plain candlesticks and turns them into really cute little raised bowls. Again, same thing. I'm going to use my E6000 and then a little bit of hot glue, glue them together. And then I think these would look really nice on a table in between a flower arrangement, and you can fill it with fruit or candy or anything seasonal. But it's such an easy DIY, and these would make great gifts too, and affordable. I'm gonna center them right in the middle of the bowls and then set them aside and let them dry. 2 crystal candlesticks matching 2 bowls. Perfect way to upcycle these items. This bowl has been banged around in my shed for forever. I'm gonna make it into a nice little tiered bowl with this spindle, and I love this cute little wooden bowl I picked up probably at a yard sale this summer somewhere, had it tucked away, and I think it's gonna look really good with this spindle. So I'm just gonna cut these spindles down to size that will work with these, and then we'll put them put together. I've cut these spindles to the size that I want, and I'm just going to glue them together. I love this yellow, and it's just an acrylic paint, and I did my spindle painting technique to paint this, and they come together painted so fast, and you can use up all those little bits and pieces of paint that you have in all those different colors to do projects like this. Just gonna center it right in the middle. I love this wooden bowl. This actually might end up staying with me. I kind of like it. Okay, and then we'll put together the white bowl. This one I had previously had on something. I didn't like it. I took apart, so I'm redoing it. Gonna put the E6000 on it. I sanded this down too, so it will adhere really well on top of that other glue that was on there. You know, sometimes you put a project together and it's just not what you liked. That's what happened with this. I took it apart, stuck it back in my shed, and then never did anything with it. But I think this is gonna look really cute with this little spindle on it. Okay, gonna set them aside and let them dry. 2 wooden bowls that I've had around forever, little pieces of spindles, and they make adorable little decor bowls. Next one, thrift store baskets. I have way too many baskets that I've collected, and they make really cute tiered trays. I've got a little bit of a spindle. I like this color, actually coordinating with these. And again, I'm just gonna glue this and glue this one on the top, and it's gonna make a really cute tiered tray and bowl that you can fill up with fruit or greenery or just stash anything in it. Little bit of the E6000, some hot glue to hold it in place. Center it right in the center, and then hold it and let it dry. Once that hot glue is dried and it's secured, then I'm gonna put some E6000 on the top, and then some hot glue, and glue the top on. This always feels so good when I get all these little bits and pieces that I've had stored away and I haven't done anything with, and I can clean them all up, but still make something really pretty. I'm gonna press that down and just hang on to it until that hot glue sets, and it's all done. Don't overlook those wicker baskets, especially if you can find 2 that match, because they make perfect tiered trays that you can fill with all kinds of stuff. Next project, I picked up these from the thrift store. They were $2.49. They were on the 75% off table, so really cheap. I cut these out from some scrap wood that I had. I just used a coffee can lid, traced a circle out, and then cut them out with a jigsaw. I'm going to take them out to my shed. I'm going to stain them, put some polyacrylic sealer on them, and I think I'm also going to spray paint these black so it'll look really nice all put together. I've got these candlesticks all painted. Now, you can paint glass with chalk paint, but if you're in a hurry and you want to finish projects fast, just use a paint and primer spray paint, and it works really well and covers and has a really good bond to the glass. especially if it's something that you're going to be using every day on your kitchen table and you need to wipe it down. The spray paint works perfect. And I've got my rounds with a coat of stain and a coat of polyacrylic sealer, and I'm just going to glue them on the top of these candlesticks, and that's it. Little bit of E6000, the hot glue, and then center them in those wooden rounds. And if you have access to a jigsaw, these are really easy to cut out. If you don't have access to a jigsaw, you can always find rounds at the dollar store, and they would work for this project too. And you can paint them up or you can stain them, and they make fantastic risers. Okay, I got these all ready. I'm going to center them right in the middle. I'm kind of eyeballing this. If you're not very good at that, you can always measure them out and find your center when you put them on. Sometimes I'm not very good at it and I mess it up and I don't have it in the center, but usually my eye is pretty good. And then we're going to set them aside and let them dry. And I just had some battery operated candles that I picked up at the thrift store and added a little bit of greenery on top of those wooden discs. And I think they look really great. Next upcycle is this nice wooden shelf that I found. I like it that the pegs are at the top. And what's also fabulous is the little pegs weren't glued in. So I can pull them all out and it makes it so much easier to paint this board. I'm going to layer a couple colors on this using my candle wax technique and finish it off with some white chalk paint. This is just a pillar candle that I got at the dollar store. It works great for distressing wood. You just rub it along the wood wherever you think it would naturally kind of wear off. And when you paint it, wherever this wax is, the paint won't adhere to it. I guess I forgot to take the price tag off of this. I picked this up for $3.99 at Value Village. First color that I'm going to put on is some of my homemade black chalk paint. And I'm just going to paint the whole board. I'm actually not going to put the black paint intentionally along these grooves because I think that would be nice to leave that kind of that wood color. I'm going to put another coat of candle wax on top of the black that's all dry. And then I've got some green acrylic paint that I'm going to use. I think it'll be really nice to pop through when we're all finished. This is just actually Christmas green. And I'm just going to put a light coat over the whole board. It doesn't matter if I have every little bit painted because we're going to have this be really distressed looking. The green's all dry. Some more wax. You can never have enough wax when you want to create distressed paint. I get really aggressive with it because I love the look of the distressed wood, but you don't need to. If you like just a little bit, then just use a little bit of the wax. Okay, now we're going to put on our last coat, and I've got some of my homemade white chalk paint, and I'm going to put a good coat of that over the whole shelf. Okay, the white paint is completely dry. Now here's the trick when you're doing the wax technique. Take out your heat gun or your hair dryer, and you're going to warm up all of that wax that's been layered on this paint. And then we're going to take a scraper. This is just a razor scraper. You can use a regular scraper. And we're going to scrape away at that wax, and all those layers will show up. Okay, we've got it all scratched off and distressed. And we've taken that plain stained board and made it look really old and vintage. And now I'm going to put a graphic in the middle that just says welcome, and then put the pegs back in. I've just printed off a simple welcome, and I'm just going to use my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer to put it on the back. And I think I'm going to kind of center it so it looks nice with the pegs. So I'm going to put it maybe right about here. This is sat overnight. It's completely dry. I've just got a little bit of water and a little sponge. I'm just going to wet that until you can just start to see the graphics show through. and then rub off all the paper. And then once all the paper's gone, we're gonna have a beautiful graphic on our coat rack. This technique takes a little bit of practice and just a little bit of patience, but once you get the hang of it, it works fantastic. These were done on regular computer paper on my laser jet printer. My graphic is all finished. It looks great. I really like it. I'm going to put a coat of the polyacrylic sealer over the whole coat rack. And then I'm just going to leave the pegs just that natural wood color. I like it just natural. And I've got a little bit of wood glue. I'm going to put a little bit of wood glue in each little hole and then stick the post in, and it'll stay really secure. Just like that. I took a plain wooden hanger and turned it into a chippy, old looking piece. And I love that I just kept the pegs just the wooden color. I think that finishes it off nice. Next project. I think this came off of a broken piece of a clock. I tucked it away because I knew I could use this piece for something. Not loving the heart here. So I'm going to take it out to my shed and I'm going to cut it straight across here and get rid of this heart. And then I'll have a nice square to put a picture in the middle. So I took this out to my shed and I just drew a line across the bottom here and then cut off this heart. And now we're left with a way more modern looking frame than with this. But I'll still keep this. I'm going to tuck it away. You never know when you can use a cut-off heart for a project. I'm going to put a coat of my black homemade chalk paint over the whole frame, and then I'll put a little bit of candle wax on it, and then I'll cover it up with the white chalk paint. I don't want this really distressed, so I'm just going to put a little bit of wax just along the edge and around the corners, because I just want that black just peeking out just a little bit. So that should be enough. And I had a piece of really thin wood, and I just cut it out to size to fit on the inside. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give everything a coat of my white chalk paint. It's completely dry. I just put a light coat of the white on top of it, and I'm just gonna take my sanding block and everywhere where there was wax, that paint is gonna sand off, and you can see how it was pretty aggressively put right there, so that took it right down to the wood. I really like that chippy rustic wood look. I know it's not for everybody, but I really love it. So that's why a lot of my projects, I do this technique on them. I'm just going to sand in the middle here, and then we'll be all ready to finish off the inside. We're going to do some iron-on decoupage, and this was printed off on my inkjet printer. It's a picture from one of our camping adventures, cooking a turkey over the campfire. Now you want to seal your ink when you've used an inkjet. Otherwise, when you apply the Mod Podge on top or underneath, your inks could smear. I just have some aerosol hairspray. You just want to give it a good coat, set it aside, and let it dry, and that will seal all of the ink into your picture. I'm going to be using my Mod Podge mat, and I'm going to put a liberal amount over all of the wood, and then we're going to let that dry, and then we're going to put another coat on, and then we're going to iron on our photo. So that's a pretty good coat on that. I'm going to set this aside and let it dry. We have 2 coats of the Mod Podge completely dry. I'm just going to take my photo and center it exactly where I want it. And then I'm going to take a piece of parchment paper. You want to make sure you're using parchment paper, not wax paper, and make sure everything's nice and smooth. And now I have my iron. I have it set on the highest setting with no steam. And you're just going to just very gently just iron on your photo. And this is fantastic for not having any bubbles or wrinkles, and it works really well. And it just takes a little bit of pressure just to make sure that you've got your photo sealed right on. You can lift up your parchment paper and see how it looks, and do it a little bit more if you think you need it. And we have a perfect photo ironed on to that piece of wood to put in the frame. Now, as a top coat, I don't like to use Mod Podge. I like to use a polyacrylic sealer. Make sure you're using a water-based one. If you're using an oil base, it will yellow on you. So I'm just gonna put a light coat over that and it'll seal it right up really nice. I think this turned out fantastic, and it is exactly what I wanted. I have an adventure wall where I've done a whole bunch of pictures of all the adventures my husband and I have done and been on, and this is going to be added to that wall. Next project is this mail and bill wall hanging. It looks like somebody's done maybe some toll painting, and it's got a little tiny bit of a raised edge on it. I'm going to take it out to my shed and give it a really good sanding so it's nice and smooth, and then bring it back in here and start painting. This is all painted. It took 2 coats of the spray paint, and then I put a light coat of my homemade chalk paint on top. I want to put graphics on it, and my graphics adhere better to a chalk painted surface. This is the graphic that I'm going to use. I'm going to turn this into a cell phone charging area, and I've printed off my graphics on regular computer paper, reverse the text. This graphic is available in my Etsy store. If you find these out thrifting and you want to make one for yourself, I'm going to put the charging station up here and 1 and 2 here, and it's going to keep your cell phones nice and neat and tidy, and you can plug it in. So I'll show you how I'm going to finish it up. I got my graphics all cut out. I'm going to be using my Mod Podge mat, and I'm just going to put a real light coat of the Mod Podge over the graphics, and then center them exactly where I want them. Make sure there's no wrinkles and bubbles. And then I'm going to set it aside until tomorrow, and then we'll rub off the paper and we'll finish this up. Okay, it's the next day, and this is completely dry. I've just got a sponge with a little bit of water on it. I'm just going to lightly dampen that and rub off these graphics. I'm really excited for this project because I always see these little mail holders, mail organizers at the thrift store, and I think this is going to work out perfect. I'm saving this one for myself. It's going to go in my kitchen, and I'm going to be charging my cell phones in it. I have this all done, and I'm going to drill some holes in the sides to fit through my chargers. Now I have a Type-C charger and an iPhone charger, so you want to make sure that you're picking out a drill bit that's going to be big enough for those chargers to go through, and this one's going to work perfect. Now, because this is going to have lots of fingers coming in and out, I want to seal it really well so I can wipe it down with a damp rag if I want to. I'm going to use my engine enamel. This gives it a really durable coating. I'm going to take it out to my shed and give it a really good coat all over the whole project. Now I've got the holes all done, and you can see putting the smaller end in through there, and this is my Type-C. It fits right through there, and now you can mount it on your wall and charge your cell phones, and it looks pretty. I love this DIY. I think that it just kind of takes a messy looking charging area and makes it nice and pretty, and you can just set your cell phone in there and plug these ends into your wall outlet, and you're all set. So keep your eye out for these letter and bill holders and give this DIY a try. Next upcycle is this little metal pot that I found at the thrift store. The white paint needed to be freshened up a little bit, so I mixed up some of my white homemade chalk paint and I gave it one good coat across that whole pot.
And again, anything that I put a little quote on or a little word always sells better for me. So we're gonna do this little quote. I've sized it for my little metal pot, use the Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method, and apply it to the pot. Now there's other ways that you can put graphics on your projects. You can do a custom napkin, you can use your Cricut, you can even hand draw, but I just find that this works so well for me and I can put it on so many projects and it's affordable. That's what I love about it. It doesn't cost a lot of money. You don't have to buy vinyl. You just need computer paper and some Mod Podge, and most of us already have a printer. While I'm waiting for that graphic to dry, I'm going to add some twine along the top of this little pot. I've let it sit for 24 hours, and again, we're dampening it. We're going to now rub off the paper. This can be the trickiest part of this technique, and if you just take your time and you practice a little bit, you can get really good at it. It doesn't take much pressure, and using your fingers works the best so you can feel the paper rubbing off underneath. Once I have all the paper off, again, I'm going to seal it up with my polyacrylic sealer. I love it because you can now dust your project if you want to afterwards. And how cute is this? I think I might have paid 50 cents for it at the thrift store. I've upcycled it. You can put a full plant in it, or you can even plant a real plant in it, and it's perfect to give as a gift. Did you know you could DIY your own labels using packing tape? I picked up these glass jars. I'm going to keep them in my kitchen pantry, but I want to custom make some labels for them, and I'm going to show you today how easy it is. Now this will only work with a laser printer. It will not work with an inkjet printer. You're gonna need some packing tape. I've printed these labels off with my laser printer on regular computer paper. You're gonna need a credit card and a dish of warm water. This graphic is available in my Etsy store. I think it's 4 or 5 sheets of all common words of things that you would have in your kitchen or your pantry that you can make labels with. I've also sized these to the size that I wanted in my Google Docs, and now we're ready to turn them into labels. This is just regular packing tape, and I've cut a length a little bit bigger than the graphic. I've put a little dime on the table because when you're pressing it down, it makes it easier to peel the tape off afterwards. Just a little crafting hack. And then take a card and really press that tape into that piece of paper. You want it to be really bonded well with that packing tape, and you can see how much easier it is to peel that tape off with that little dime underneath. We're now ready to turn this into a label. Before we do that, we're going to finish up some more, and same process. Use your packing tape, press it down really firmly onto the paper, and once we have these all made, we're going to then get that dish of warm water, and you just soak them in the water. You're going to let them sit for about 30 to 60 seconds, depending on how thick your paper is. And once that has happened, we're going to take it out of the water, and you're going to rub the paper off the back. And as you do that, it's just like magic. The graphic is going to stay on the tape, but the paper is going to rub away and the tape is going to remain sticky. So you're creating a label that you can put on your glass jars or bottles and display them in your home or in your pantry, in your kitchen. Add it to your junk journals, mixed media. It's just limitless what you can do with this fun technique. Once we have all the labels finished, you can go in and you can neaten them up and make the lines nice and straight before you add them onto your project. And after the labels have dried, the glue reactivates in the tape and you're able to tape it onto your glass jar or your glass bottles, and it's going to stick. And the nice thing about this is if you change your mind, you can peel the tape off, you can make another label, or you can change up your decor. This is probably one of my favorite DIYs that I do. It's so fun. It makes everything look nice and neat and organized. And it's also a really great DIY to do with kids. You could print off their name. They could add it onto their books or their backpacks. Fun DIY. And this is the pillar candle that I picked up at the dollar store. You want to make sure that you pick up a candle that's light in color for this technique. And we're going to custom make our own napkins, so you can put whatever you want on them and custom make them with names or pictures or graphics. Today I'm going to show you how I'm going to make one with one of my graphics. And you only want the back of the napkin, and then you want to iron the napkin flat. I'm just going to put a piece of parchment paper over top of it so we can get rid of the wrinkles before we go to use it. Just keep it on setting 6, no steam, and just get the wrinkles out of that napkin. And you want to be using a white napkin onto a white candle so it'll blend in really well. And now it's nice and flat and it'll be really easy to work with. Now I've just got a plain piece of computer paper and I'm using my crafter's tape, and I'm just going to put a little dab in each corner and on the side of the computer paper so I can stick the napkin onto it so it will go through my printer. This technique will work on an inkjet and a laserjet printer. And you just want to set down your paper right in the middle of the napkin and smooth it out so there's no wrinkles and no bubbles. And then we're ready to cut off all the excess napkin around the edge. And make sure you cut the napkin really close to the edge of the computer paper because you don't want any edges to get caught as it's going through your printer. These candles would be perfect for a wedding, baby shower, birthdays, just to give away as a gift because you can customize them with names, anything that you want. The possibilities are endless. Now I'm ready to put it through my printer. My napkin goes face down in this type of printer. Shut the door and we're ready to print my graphic on it. And there we have the graphic printed on the napkin, ready to use on the candle. And now I'm just going to cut around the graphic, just leaving a little bit along the edges. It'll blend in really well when we put it on the candle. And now we're just going to take the napkin off the piece of computer paper and we're ready to put it onto the candle. Now for this step, you're going to need wax paper. This is really important. You actually need the wax paper because we need the wax on the one side to help melt the napkin into the candle. So you want to take a piece that's a little bit bigger than the candle to wrap around. And you'll notice on the wax paper, you can feel the waxy side and the paper side. The wax side, you want to go in towards the candle. So we're going to place a napkin, and I got a little bit of static in my napkin here, but we're going to place the napkin exactly where you want it on the candle. And then we're going to take the wax paper and press it down firmly against that napkin. You want it nice and flat with no wrinkles, no bubbles. Get it laying right tight to that napkin. And then you're going to grab the excess wax paper at the back to hang on to when you're heating it. I like to use a dish towel to hang on to it, or you can get an oven mitt, but you want to have something because it does get quite warm when you're using the hair dryer, so you want to protect your hand from the heat. And then you're just going to take your hair dryer on the highest setting and just gently go back and forth over the napkin and the candle. Don't hold it in one spot too long because you'll actually melt the candle too much. You just want to go back and forth really gently, and as it's starting to melt, you'll notice that the napkin will change color and it'll get darker, so you can tell that the wax paper has melted into the napkin and the napkin below is starting to melt. Just take your time and go back and forth really slow. You don't want to put too much heat on this at once or you will wreck the candle and you'll melt it too much. And you can see how it's starting to get darker now. That means that it's working and starting to melt into the candle. This is such an easy DIY, and it is so fast and so easy to do. I am having a lot of fun making a lot of candles. And you can see how dark the lettering is now, so you know that it's almost finished and almost ready. And now you're just going to gently peel away that wax paper, and the napkin will be adhered right to the candle. And that's it. That's all you have to do. And if you don't want to make your own custom napkins, you can just use a napkin with a pattern on it right from the dollar store. And always remember, never leave a candle unattended. I've burned these before, never had any problem with the napkin applied to these. But just be mindful when you're using them. Most of these I just use as decor, and I actually don't even light them. So head to the dollar store, pick up some of these candles, or look at the thrift store next time you're there and pick up some of the candles there, and give this technique a try. Next one, I always pick up these size tins. They make amazing tiered trays. I'm going to take this outside, give it a spray paint with some black. This was 79 cents at our thrift store, and I think it was 50% off of that. So you can always find these really reasonably priced. And I'm going to use this spindle. My tin container has one coat of spray paint on it. And now I'm going to go and paint it with a coat of chalk paint. And it's going to give it kind of that rustic feel. I'm going to give it a really good coat on both the top and the bottom. The chalk paint has completely dried on this tin. I'm just going to take my sanding block. This is like a 120 grit. And I'm just going to sand off to bring some of that black chalk paint peeking through like that. And I'm just going to work away at that. I've got it all sanded, and it's given it a real chippy kind of old antique look. And the lid too. And I printed off the graphic, Antiques. I think that's going to look really cute along the bottom. I'm going to do my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer with this. And if you're interested, the graphics that I'm going to be using in the next couple projects are in my Etsy store. If you want to grab them, make sure you use the code SAVE50 and you get 50% off all the graphics in my store. So I'm going to put this on the canister. I've left this sit overnight. It's all nice and dry now. I'm just going to take a damp rag and dampen the paper and take and see the graphics come through, and then we're going to rub it off. I've got the graphic transfer all finished. I'm going to give this a really good coat of polyacrylic sealer. This one's all ready to put together. I'd actually picked out that red spindle, but once I started putting this together, it was just way too big. So I found these little ones, painted them with some yellow acrylic, and then sanded them and made them really rustic. And I think it's going to look really great with that antique graphic on there. So I'm going to glue this together. This one's all put together. I do find sometimes if you're using a smaller spindle, it might not be as secure. If you find that, you can always, after it's all set, put a little tiny flathead screw in the bottom to keep it in place better. And you can do that to this piece too, underneath, before you glue the two together, and that would secure it up really well. I'm going to see how this holds up, and if it's strong enough, then I'll just leave it, and if not, then I'll add a couple little screws. And this one might be my favorite, made from a little tin container, 79 cents. And look how adorable that is. I love the farmhouse feel of it. I love that chippy spindle and the antiques graphic. It's perfect. I think I picked this up at a yard sale this summer, $2. And I knew what I was going to do with it, but I never got around to it. So today's the day. I'm going to take this out. I'm going to give it a light coat of some black spray paint,
And then I think I'm going to paint it with some white chalk paint, put a fun graphic on it, make it into a tiered tray or a tiered bowl. I think it'll look really cute. And I think I'm going to use this green spindle to make it tiered. So I'm going to take that out too and cut it to the size that I want. This container is all dry. I just put a light coat of the black spray paint on, and now I'm going to paint it with a couple coats of my homemade white chalk paint. The chalk paint has completely dried on this, and I'm going to sand it so I can expose some of the dark black and make it look more vintage and old. I've got everything all sanded, and I'm going to do my homemade napkin decoupage on this, and I'm going to use the water technique to decoupage onto this. You just need a plastic sleeve, some Mod Podge, and a little bit of water, and it's really easy to do. I'm going to get started. This decoupage napkin is all dry, and I'm going to give this all a coat of the polyacrylic sealer in satin so it's sealed up really nice if we have it in the kitchen and it needs to be wiped down. Now to glue these spindles in, I'm just going to use some E6000, some hot glue so it'll hold it in place, and then I'm going to put a little piece that I've got for the top that I found that matches for the tiered tray or bowl. Let's just get this centered right in the middle. Perfect. And then I found this little piece and it matches really well. I'm going to put that in the lid, let it dry, and then I'm going to glue it together, the top and the bottom. I think this turned out adorable. I love it. You can put some greenery in the bottom, and then the top you can put little knickknacks, little shelf sitters. I think it's cute, and it was so easy from a yard sale, $2 container and lid. Next time you're at the thrift store, head to the children's section and look for some wooden building blocks. I'm going to show you how you can turn these into really cute shelf sitters, and these are also some of my best selling items. I gave these a light sanding with some 120 grit sandpaper, and then I painted them with my homemade white chalk paint, and I just did the face of each of these wooden blocks. If you are a reseller, this is a fantastic way to get all kinds of these little blocks that you can turn into shelf sitters and sell and make a profit. After the chalk paint had dried, I went back in with that sandpaper again and just made them a little bit rustic. I have a sheet of words in my Etsy store that is going to be fantastic for this project. I sized them up as best I could because some of the blocks are all different random lengths, but these are going to work really great to do my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method on these blocks. Twist here though, I'm not using Mod Podge because I couldn't find any at my local craft store, but they had this other brand that's the exact same as Mod Podge and it works just as well. I've printed off these graphics on my laser printer, making sure to reverse the text. If you grab these out of my Etsy store, they're already reversed, so you don't need to worry about that. Applied the product and then centered it on the building block and got all the bubbles and wrinkles out of it. And then we're just going to set them aside and we're going to let them dry until tomorrow. So next time you are at the thrift store, head right to the toy section and see if you can find a bag of these building blocks. I see them all the time. I always grab them and I always put these together because like I said before, these are some of my best sellers and I can bulk put these together and do them really quickly. It's the next day. I let them sit overnight. We're now going to take a damp rag with a little bit of water and we're going to wet that paper until the graphic starts to show through, and then just gently rub off the paper and the graphic is going to stay on that chalk paint underneath, creating the cutest little sign.
I've got this one all done, and now we're ready to put on a top coat. And I like using my water-based polyacrylic sealer. I've got a matte finish here. You can pick out the finish that you like for your signs. And I'm just going to put a light coat on this and set it aside and let it dry. We're going to work away at all of the others, and you're not going to believe how cute these are. Always find wooden candlesticks and wooden bowls at the thrift store, and I'm going to show you how we can incorporate these two together into a beautiful piece of home decor. We're going to use some E6000, and we're going to put a little bit around the rim of that candle. Now we're going to flip the bowl upside down and center that candlestick right in the middle of that bowl. Then we're going to set it aside, let it dry until tomorrow. Now, honestly, this looks beautiful just the way it is. I don't even need to paint it, but it was really scratched up and dinged. It's hard to tell on the camera here, but they were both in pretty rough shape. So I got out my beeswax stick, and I'm just rubbing it everywhere where this would have naturally aged if it was really old, and then applying it all over the bowl in the candlestick. And then I'm going in with my black homemade chalk paint, and I'm going to give one good coat over the entire piece. I want this really chippy and rustic looking, so I'm actually doing two techniques to achieve that look. I put on the beeswax that you saw in the beginning, and now I'm putting on some Vaseline. Same thing, I'm just kind of putting it here and there wherever it would have naturally aged, and then we're going to get the wood color showing through and the black color showing through when we're finished and we distress this. I got out my white homemade chalk paint, and I gave a coat over the entire piece. Now this is dry completely, and I'm going in with a sanding block. This is an 80 grit sanding block, and we're just gonna knock down the Vaseline and the wax, and it's gonna expose those two colors underneath, giving this a really rustic feel. Now again, you can stop at this step, but I find in my area, when I put a little graphic on my projects, even if it's just one simple word, they seem to sell better. So I'm going to put the word grateful on the middle of this bowl. I've got some Mod Podge now. We've printed this off on a laser printer, making sure to reverse the text, and we're spreading that Mod Podge across that whole piece of paper. I got a little bit messy on this one, and we're going to center it in this right in the middle of that bowl. We're going to press out any bubbles or wrinkles, making sure that it's nice and smooth, and then we're going to set it aside and let it dry completely. It's the next day. We have a little dish of water, and I'm just going to dampen that paper until you can start to see the graphic show through, and then we're going to rub off the paper. This is a really easy graphic to rub off. There's not very much paper. It's just a small word, but it really looks cute in the bottom of this bowl. Now we're ready to seal this all up. I'm using my polyacrylic sealer, matte finish, and we're just going to apply it all over the bowl and the candlestick holder. These make excellent gifts, and they're really affordable, and you can always find these at the thrift store. So give this project a try. And here's some other bowls that I've done, different colors, different quotes, and I think they're just gorgeous. You can never have too many wooden bowls. This was a fun upcycle. I found a candlestick and a glass bowl. We're going to incorporate these two together. I took the wooden candlestick outside and I gave it a coat of this beautiful blue spray paint. Once it was dry, I went in with my 80 grit sandpaper and I sanded that whole candlestick holder. And now we're going to get out that E6000 and we're just going to put it around the rim, and then we're going to place that glass bowl on top of it. Now you can also use a little bit of hot glue if you are in a hurry and you want it to stay put, and I don't find that it makes a difference with the E6000 not working, and you can move it around a little bit and not have to worry about it. But I left mine overnight, and now I'm just filling up with a little bit of dirt, and I had some succulents, and I'm just going to add the succulents in that little dish, add a few little rocks, and we have made a DIY terrarium with stuff that I have found at the thrift store that was a couple of dollars to put together. And again, this would make a fantastic gift for someone. Now we're back to those words. I printed this off on my laser printer, again on regular computer paper. This is just like Mod Podge. I got it at Michael's. It's actually the Decor brand, and I sized it to fit the front of that candle holder. And we're going to do that transfer method, letting it sit for 24 hours and then rubbing the paper off. Do you still have a banana hanger in your kitchen and it's looking really dated? If you do, you might want to try this DIY. I found this one at the thrift store. It looks like it actually was homemade, and I'm going to give it a coat of black homemade chalk paint. It actually took 2 coats of that black chalk paint, and once it was dry, I went in with some 80 grit sandpaper and I gave it a really good sanding to give it that rustic look. I pulled a glass jar out of my recycling bin and I painted it with my chalk paint. Now I'm going to add a graphic onto this glass jar. I've printed off, again, just like the other projects, on regular computer paper with my laser printer. You can also do this with an inkjet printer. It is a bit more tricky and the transfer is a little bit more faded. Putting on my Decoupage mat from Decor, which is the exact same as Mod Podge, centering it on that glass jar and getting all the bubbles and wrinkles out of it, setting it aside and letting it dry for 24 hours. And did you know that you can also do graphic transfers with polyacrylic sealer? Let's add a hanger on the glass jar. I'm just using some twine and my hot glue gun, and I'm just going to attach it so we can hang this from that banana hanger. Now let's seal everything up with this polyacrylic sealer. And by adding the polyacrylic sealer, it allows you to use a damp rag and wipe these down. It doesn't make it waterproof, but it makes it water resistant. And I had this faux succulent in my stash and it fit perfectly right into that glass jar. And we're now going to take that piece of twine and hang it from the banana hanger. And how cute of an upcycle is this? And it looks fabulous in my kitchen. Again, another great gift idea on a budget that you can find easily at the thrift store or in your recycling bin. Lamps are something that we always see at the thrift store, and they're fantastic to upcycle, and there's so many different ways to do it. This one's really dated. It's going to need a paint job, and I'm going to do a little bit of work on the shade also. We're going to put a fringe on this lampshade. I picked up this macrame cord on Amazon, and you can just watch and see how I create this fringe. It's really easy to do, and it's better than me talking through it and trying to explain, where you can just watch visually. Now have the fringe done. It's really easy to put together, simple macrame knots, and it's going to go around the width of the lampshade. The only thing that we have to do now is we're going to unravel all of these tassels. Magic of video, it's all finished. So now what I like to do is I'm going to take a comb and I'm going to comb out all of these tassels so they're nice and fluffy and they don't look like they've just been unraveled. You need a really sharp pair of scissors, and we're just going to trim this all along the edge so it's nice and straight. And now you can see how it's going to fit along that lampshade, and it's really going to make it look high-end. I'm going to use my glue gun, and we're just going to glue this tassel fringe on the bottom of the lampshade. And you don't have to use macrame cord to make a fringe like this. You can also use yarn. So if you have a stash in your craft room of beautiful colors, give a try doing this process, making a fringe with some of your yarn. Okay, we have that all finished. It does take a little bit of time, but it's certainly worth the effort. Now let's get working on the base of this lamp. The blue color of this lamp is really dated. I picked this up for $10.99, but it was 50% off that day. So I'm just going to really clean it up with an alcohol wipe, make sure there's no grease or residue on it, and then tape off the cord and the top of that light socket and get painting. I mixed together some of my homemade sand paint, and you don't need to prep with this sand paint. You can just paint right on your project because it's a chalk paint base. You don't have to use white paint. You can use any color paint to create texture on your DIY projects. Once it's completely dry, I'm going to take my sanding block and I'm going to just lightly sand it, and anywhere where there's a little grain of sand, I'm going to knock the paint off the top of it so it gives it that speckled kind of brown look, textured look that looks like an old piece of ceramic. This is one of my favorite painting techniques, and I use it a lot in my DIY projects. And now we're going to seal it up again with that polyacrylic sealer so the paint is sealed really nice, and if you ever want to wipe it down with a damp rag or dust it, you'll be able to without affecting the paint finish underneath. Also make sure that you're buying a product that is water-based. If you're using an oil-based sealer as a top coat, it's going to yellow over time on you, and you don't want that to happen. And what do you think? I absolutely love it. The sand paint was the perfect choice, but the fringe finished it off, so it really gives it that modern feel. Next time you're at the thrift store, look for a lamp to upcycle. This next DIY is a whole bunch of little bits and pieces that I picked up at yard sales. This old saucepan is going to be turned into a beautiful tiered tray. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to turn up that handle into a C shape so it looks like it's attached to the pot instead of looking just like a saucepan. So I went rooting through my stash, and this is what I'm going to use for this project. An old vintage bundt pan, a spindle, some porcelain knobs, and that saucepan. We're going to get out the trusty E6000 and we're going to put this all together. I'm going to take the bundt pan, sorry I'm out of frame a little bit here, and I'm going to put the E6000 on the top of that bundt pan, and then we're going to place it right in the middle of that vintage saucepan, making sure that it's right where we want it, and then we're going to set it aside and let it dry completely. I wasn't in a rush with this project, so I left this until the next day before I went on to the next step. It's the next day. Now we're going to use those porcelain knobs as feet on the bottom of the bundt pan. Using that E6000 again, we are going to place one in each corner of that bundt pan so it acts like 4 feet on the bottom. I wanted these to stay put, so I used a little bit of painter's tape to hold them in place. And again, I wasn't in a hurry, so I left these till the next day until they were really dry. And now we're starting to get that resemblance of a tiered tray. And the spindle, I wanted to put in the top saucepan, put some E6000 on the bottom of it, and then put some painter's tape to hold it straight up. And this is what I created. I put in some faux flowers, some daisies in the top, a vintage doily, and a couple of my shelf sitters that I did with that Mod Podge transfer technique. I think this is absolutely adorable, a great way to upcycle that old kitchenware that most people would probably just overlook. And I think this is going to look fantastic in a farmhouse kitchen. I'm sure you've all been to the thrift store and seen these wooden items that have that orange hue and just look really dated. I picked up these candlesticks and I'm going to show you how you can transform them and make them look modern again. These were each 50 cents a piece, an amazing steal, but let's upcycle these. I'm going to scuff sand these with a sanding block. We don't need to really take it down that much, but just give it something so we can get that top layer of that orange tinted stain off. Now by sanding these, it does work pretty well for bringing these back to life and making them look like they're not screaming 80s, as you can see here. But I'm going to show you how you can bleach wood and even bring it up to an even more nicer, modern looking piece that you would find at a big box store. This is just some bleach and some water, and we're just going to spray it on this candlestick and then let it sit. This works really well in a good ventilated area because it's bleach, so you don't want to be doing it right in your house and having that bleach smell go all the way through. I'm doing this out in my shed. The door is wide open, and it's going to prevent it from being really stinky. You're going to spray it, let it sit for 10 or 15 minutes, and then rinse it really well with water. And then if you haven't got the desired color, you can keep applying that bleach and water mixture until you get what you're looking for. So here is the finished candlestick. And what we're going to do now is we're going to seal it up with some polyacrylic sealer, and that will allow us to dust it or to have it more durable if we're going to have it in our home. And here is our candlestick upcycle. I love the color of this. It's gotten rid of that orangey brown tint, and it's much more pleasing being that bleached color. I love them. You're going to always find these at the thrift store, so give this technique a try.
Okay, we're ready to start this project. I'm not sure about the frame. I might add another color on top once I get it all finished and I do my dried flowers and see what kind of colors pull out. I might put another coat on this, but for now I'm just going to set that aside and we're going to work on the graphics on this. So this was the inside of the frame. It's just the backer, and what I did was I put one coat of black chalk paint and then 2 coats of white chalk paint, and we're ready to put the graphic on. I made my graphics and then I've printed them off on my LaserJet printer, and you have to make sure that you reverse your text. I just printed this off just to show you the quote that I made. And in a field of roses, she is a wildflower. And I thought that was appropriate when I'm going to add all my dried flowers all along the bottom. And I printed it off on my LaserJet printer, reversed the text, and I sized it to the size that I wanted for this piece of wood. And we're all ready to put it on with the Mod Podge. I'm just going to cut it down to size so it fits better on the piece of wood. You're just going to put a light coat over the whole graphic and then put it on the piece of wood and let it set overnight. And then when it's finished, you're going to take a damp rag and then rub off the graphics. Okay, I have the graphics all on. I'm just rubbing out any wrinkles or bubbles. It's all good. I'm just going to set this aside, let it dry thoroughly. I usually leave it overnight, and then we'll be ready to rub the paper off and we'll have a beautiful graphic. Okay, this is completely dry, and now we're going to take a little damp rag and we're just going to dampen the paper just until you start to see the graphic show through. And I like to do it in sections. So I'm going to do this section first and work away at it, and you just rub it until all the paper comes off. And you just kind of go gently and just get the feel for it. And It takes a little bit of a knack and a little bit of patience, but it works perfect. And as you can see, as you work away, all that paper rubs off and then the graphic is left on your project. I have the graphics all done, and now we're ready to use the dried flowers that I pressed from my garden and some wildflowers that I found out and around my house. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of lay them out, see how I like them, and then I'm going to Mod Podge them onto my piece of wood. So it'll all be incorporated into one, and frame will then go on when it's all finished. So I'm just going to work away on these dried flowers and see how I like them. I have them kind of set where I think I want to put them. So I'm just going to take my time and just Mod Podge them onto that board. And I'll probably fiddle with it a bit, but I am loving the way that it's going to look and all the colors of those flowers. I have this set up so I have the base of the dried flowers of how I want them. I'm using my Mod Podge mat, and there's not really a real special technique to this. You just want to, now these are really brittle from when I dried them. I'm going to put a little bit on the back, just gently, because you don't want to break any leaves off. Just kind of pat it on and then flip it over and kind of just place it where you want it. And then just gently, just take your paintbrush and just add the Mod Podge. Make sure you have a real good coat on it so it's going to stay put. And then we're just going to just do section by section and layer it on. After seeing all the colors of the dried flowers come together, I think I want to make a little pop of color on the frame. So I am going to use my baby wipes, and I've got some pink acrylic paint, and I'm just going to dry brush just on top of it, because then I'll have like all three of these colors popping through. I'm going to have some pink, I'm going to have some black, I'm going to have some gray, and I think that'll really complement the wildflowers and the pressed flowers that I have on the picture. So I'm going to work away at that. And I think that was a really good idea to add a little splash of pink to the frame. I think it's going to look really good with all those dried flowers in that graphic. And I'm ready to put this into the back of the frame. It's all dry. Loving the pink. That was an amazing choice to do that. So I'm just going to put this in and then use my hot glue gun just to secure it back into the frame. I have a collection of some dried flowers, some faux flowers, and I think I'm just going to nestle them in between. It'll give it kind of more of a 3D look, and it might brighten it up a little bit, because I find some of the dried flowers, when I dried them, they kind of went a little bit darker. That's why I added a little bit of the acrylic paint to make the colors pop a bit. And I think this will finish it off really well. I'm just going to use hot glue from my hot glue gun and just kind of place them where I think it's going to look the best.
finished, and that little splash of those artificial and faux flowers finished it off beautiful, and I love it. It's so whimsical and so bright, and I think it would look perfect in a little girl's room. Vintage cutting board. It's probably from the 90s. It needs a refresh. I'm going to give it a coat of flat white spray paint first to start it off. The spray paint's all dry, and now I'm going to put a coat of my homemade chalk paint on top of that. I'm ready to put the graphics on my cutting board. This is the one that I'm going to do. I made this one. I think it's really great for the kitchen or for a baker. I've put it into my Word program, reversed it, printed it off on my LaserJet printer on regular computer paper, and I'm just going to place it right on my cutting board with some Mod Podge mat. Now this is all ready. It's sat overnight for 24 hours. I'm just going to wet it with a wet rag and then rub off the paper, and I'll be left with fantastic graphics. And this is all finished and ready to seal with a polyacrylic sealer. All finished, and I love the way it turned out. Add a little bit of jute twine to the top. I'm loving this graphic, and I think it's way better than the before. When I found this vintage ceramic stoneware, I knew it would be perfect to add a beeswax candle into it. I had some leftover beeswax from a project I did making some beeswax wraps. We're gonna melt down that beeswax. I like to do this in a tin can, and I've done this on low heat, and it took 10 or 15 minutes for it to completely melt down. I had these wooden wicks already. I'm going to place it in the bottom of that stoneware and then add our wick and then pour in our melted beeswax. I'm slowly pouring in that beeswax, and I'm so excited to turn this into a candle. And then after we burn it, we can always just clean it up and use it in our kitchen also. I love making these as gifts for friends and family. After it's set, I'm just going to trim back that wick. And how beautiful is this? From a vintage ceramic container that we found at the thrift store.